So our first presenter today is Jay Walker Smith. He's the executive chairman of the Futures Company. It's a future research consultancy. He's not only that, though. He's also a blogger, he's also an author, and he's a 2012 inductee into the North Carolina Advertising Hall of Fame. Jay Walker Smith is here to help us transcend today to share around the kinship economy. Please welcome Jay Walker Smith.
Ready? Thank you very much. Very glad to be here today. I appreciate that very generous introduction. It is really an honor and a privilege to be here today at TEDxPeachtree 2012. And I want to get us kicked off this morning, sort of start off the program, if you will, with a paradox. And a paradox that is the primary motive force in society and the marketplace today. The thing, if you will, that transcends all else. Now, I know that sounds like a lot of hyperbole here this early in the morning, so I don't want to get us started off with too much over-exaggeration before we've had a shot at a second cup of coffee out there. But I do want to argue that the biggest thing at work in the world today is best understood as a tension of opposing forces. And what I'm talking about are social relationships. Talk of the town these days. Social connections, social networks, social ties, social everything. That's what we primarily think about these days. And social networks are dominating our conversations. It is a lot of conversation about the strength of our ties. And it is this paradox, these competing realities of stronger ties and weaker ties that I want to address here this morning. Because it is this phenomenon of weaker ties that is giving rise to this transcendent phenomenon of kinship. Indeed, we live in a world these days in which our ties are at a further remove. And yet, it is this very phenomenon of our weakening ties that is creating a strengthening of ties that it is at the heart of this phenomenon of the kinship economy. Now, if you're an old baby boomer like me, you remember the 60s and the 70s when individuality was championed above all else. Do your own thing was our battle cry. Social connections didn't go away, but they definitely took a back seat to individuality. Today, it's the complete reverse. Social networks, social connections, social ties dominate our discussions and our conversations and all of our planning. They are the overriding cultural priority today. And yet, oddly, much of what we hear about our contemporary social ties emphasizes their almost gossamer-like quality. We hear that our strongest ties are thinning out. We hear that the number of people we have in our social networks far exceeds those that we could possibly know well. We hear that more people are living alone. We hear that the amount of information that we are inundated with on a daily basis forces us to recoil and withdraw. It all sounds ominous. And when social critics add all of this up, they come to some pretty bad-sounding conclusions. We've all heard them. Facebook is making us lonely. We live alone together. Our minds are washing up in the shallows. It looks bad. It sounds bad. And yet nothing could be further from the truth. Weak ties is a descriptive term sometimes used by researchers that has some unfortunate pejorative overtones that are simply misleading. Our ties are more gossamer-like, yes, but they are gossamer with the steely strength of spider silk. Our ties are changing, but we are not becoming disconnected and isolated. Loneliness is not on the rise. Our social connections are changing in character, but are no less numerous than ever before. Indeed, single people are actually more socially engaged than married people. And no credible research has ever found that technology isolates us. In fact, it's the exact opposite. Study after study over the last 20 years has consistently confirmed that people who are more engaged online are more engaged offline as well. Indeed, the arc of the internet confirms this. We have traditionally misunderstood it to be all about information. That's why we called it the information superhighway, even though every milestone and every major development along the way has been about relationships. It's been about bringing people together, about putting people in touch with one another, not mining some mountain of data out there. And so when we talk about our social connections, it's important that we address the right question. It is not a question of becoming disconnected or isolated. That is belied by all the facts and figures. Instead, it is a question of what things people are doing to sustain the social ties that are important to them in the face of all the pressures and challenges that characterize modern everyday life. And when we come to that question, the real question at hand, we come to the kinship economy. This is the paradox at work. Our weakening ties are actually leading to more, not less connection, to more, not less investment in social engagement. This is the inflection point of our times, this connection and focus on social ties that I refer to as the kinship economy. It affects us in all domains of our lives, culture, creed, and commerce. Indeed, our booming interest in relationships is exactly how critics have found their audience. And the gold standard of relationships, of course, is family, which is why this metaphor of kinship helps us better understand this dynamic at work around us, in which social currency is the new medium of exchange, and for which the bottom line is all about how you treat people. What people are searching for these days is to be treated like family. And this is creating a major sort of rethinking and reshuffling of our lifestyle aspirations. There are many ways to think about that, but I actually think the lens of commerce, that aspect of our lives, shows us a better view of how this is changing in the world around us. Because when you look at the lens of commerce, what you see is that it is the progression of the marketplace and society, not some passing fad or technology, that has brought us to this point of the kinship economy. So think about it like this. Think about the marketplace, say back to the end of World War II. At that point in time, the marketplace was all about material accumulation. We had just come off a long period of austerity and were enjoying the first fruits of the space age. And then in the late 80s and early 1990s, we got the experience economy. Retail as theater and intangibles above all else. And today, it is a social economy, the ultimate intangible. Now, the importance of this progression is that the locus of value in the marketplace and society has changed over time as well. In the material economy, it was all about product. In the experience economy, it was all about intangibles. Product didn't go away, but it took a back seat to intangibles. And today, it is relationships that command value. It's how you treat people that create a source of advantage in the marketplace. And that is the kinship economy. A marketplace and a society that is really governed by the three principles you can derive from this metaphor of kinship that we can use to understand it. Three ideas. The first of which is an idea of bloodlines, which is to say kinship is all about family. Of course, this is not something that I can claim of you. You have to claim that of me, particularly if you're a brand. You know, Microsoft ran some ads a few years ago that you probably remember in which they featured ordinary people claiming things like, I'm a PC, or Windows 7 was my idea. These ads aptly illustrate this zeitgeist. This was about people claiming brands, not the other way around. And it's a sensibility that people are taking to all aspects of their lifestyles these days, bloodlines and family. The second of these principles is intimacy. Kinship means utter transparency. It means, if you will, that I can see you in your underwear the same way we see each other around the house. It is about complete, unadorned, unashamed openness, intimacy, and transparency. And finally, it is about altruism. The people for whom we will make the biggest sacrifices, the ultimate sacrifice, are our kin. And so in my exchange of social currency with you, I have to think of your interest ahead of my own. Three rules. Bloodlines, intimacy, and altruism that create the rules of engagement for all of us in all of our guises, commerce, culture, or creed, in any situation where social currency is a medium of exchange. So in my last few minutes here this morning, what I'd like to do is just spend a minute or two on each of these three areas to help give us a fuller, more fleshed out sense of what's happening around us in the emergence of this new dynamic of kinship. Let's start with bloodlines, this first idea, this idea of family. As kinship has come to mean more to us, we have become more demanding about our circles of connections. And you see this as an ever-tightening narrowing of these circles of connections. You see it online. The biggest trend in social networks these days is smaller social networks, this narrowing of circles. And yet, as social context has come to play a more important role in the way in which we calibrate our taste and preferences, we run headlong into another paradox of kinship. Because the dark side of bloodlines can be this split into warring clans. And so we get this phenomenon of more connection and more division at the exact same time. It is this phenomenon where sometimes family is like the Waltons, and sometimes it's like the Hatfields and McCoys. It is a paradox of coming together and falling apart at the exact same time. Yet it is a coherent paradox that gives us a better understanding of the underlying dynamic shared by these divergent outcomes. The loss is one of a larger set of overarching loyalties and their replacement by these ever tighter circles of connections. Kinship connections, where we can be treated like family. Which brings us to this second principle of intimacy. This notion that we have to reframe our mode of engagement in the world at large. And again, I think the lens of commerce helps us see this. Think about the mode of engagement in the commercial world. The traditional mode of engagement is very brand-centric. It is all about brands having a relationship with you. And yet increasingly we are saying, I don't want to have a relationship with a brand. I want to have a relationship with other people. Kinship. And so the mode of engagement in the world of commerce going forward is going to be more relationship central, in which people have relationships with other people, not with brands. And the job of brands is to facilitate and foster those relationships. That's what people are looking for. They're looking for Whole Foods when they sponsor farmers markets in their parking lots as a venue for people to come together with other people. Or they're looking for Lowe's online website called Idea Exchange, where you can trade home improvement ideas with other people, not with some salesperson in a store. A new model of engagement that comes with some new imperatives of life that you can see mirrored in this world of commerce. As brands think about it, they have to remember that they no longer carry their message. Consumers do. And so what brands have to give people is social currency to spend, which is, of course, a recognition by brands that nowadays everything they do is vetted by these circles of connections. And so it's conversations, not individuals, that drive choice in the marketplace. And the new metric of success is not the old one of share of voice, but share of conversations. Because ultimately, relationships take priority over product. And indeed, relationships themselves have almost become a type of product that brands are increasingly called upon to deliver. Because relationships now have value in and of themselves, separate and apart from being some pathway to another product or experience. It is, in other words, a marketplace that is just one part of a broader society in which social connections matter more than ever. That's what people are searching for, this sense of fellow feeling. You see this in Google searches over the last several years with this increase in searches for empathy. What people are searching for is this sense of fellow feeling. Empathy is on people's minds. And this, to me at least, is the most hopeful correlate of the kinship economy, this advent of empathy. Because at root, the kinship economy is all about fellow feeling. Part and parcel of kinship, notwithstanding our partisan divides and family feuds, is this transcendent dynamic of empathy. And we see it everywhere, all around us, especially in the ways in which we are now reimagining and reinventing how and where we live. You see it, for example, in the downtown project of Zappos CEO Tony Hsieh, who has now moved company operations to recession-ravaged downtown Las Vegas in order to build, in his words, the most community-focused large city in the world. And to do so by recreating on an urban scale the Zappos corporate culture of quote-unquote serendipitous interaction. It's kinship, powered by relationships. You see it in urban crowdsourcing initiatives like New York City's decade-old 311 service, where neighborhood residents can keep watch over their communities and report problems for repair that might otherwise go unnoticed. You see this in Bristol, Connecticut's recent Bristol Rising campaign, where they were crowdsourcing community input on their plans to redevelop 17 acres of an abandoned shopping mall. This is all about fellow feeling hard at work. And this is the energy behind things like hyperlocal journalism, which is not nationwide or citywide reporting. This is news about neighborhoods. The West Seattle blog, or the Front Porch Forum in Vermont, or the Village Soup in a community in Maine. This is something that cannot be done from afar. As the Poynter Institute noted in its review of some of these hyperlocal experiments, this requires, quote unquote, a relationship with the community, which means, to continue quoting, real people with real identities connecting with one another consistently over time. You couldn't describe kinship in any better way. It is all about this phenomenon. Now, admittedly, the business model for hyperlocal journalism is still a little murky, but it's early days yet. And the promising thing is clear. There is demand for journalism that leverages the advent of empathy. Indeed, to me, this is where I think we can see the great possibility to transcend. Not in the refurbishment of our old mercenary models of clash and conflict, but in the collaboration and mutual aid that are the heart and soul of the most important factor at work in society and the marketplace today, and that is the kinship economy. Thank you very much.
Thank you.